For the European Union, it is always very important to make sure that there is a quick follow-up when there is a momentum. In case of dialogue, we had a very good meeting on 27th of February with Prime Minister Kurti and President Vučić, and they agreed basically on continuing the discussions. They agreed on the EU proposal, which became an agreement. They agreed that there are no more discussions needed on the basis of the paper, on the principles, and they also agreed that the next step will be to discuss the implementation roadmap. And this is something that's very important, because if you have a proposal, you need to know how to implement it. You need to have a time plan, you need to have a roadmap. And then we were looking at the calendar and using the momentum and also the closeness to the region. The High Representative will be in Tirana and in Skopje towards the end of the week. We have upcoming Foreign Affairs Council on the 20th, European Council on the 23rd, 24th of March, and an important momentum. And since for us the dialogue was always part of our discussions and engagements for the region, then we just combined the political and timely reasons, and it turned out that it is most convenient to do it in Ohrit, and the North Macedonian government of course generously offered to host such a meeting. So then the High Representative Borrell, as the facilitator and main conveyor of the meeting, decided, okay, let's use the time, let's use the momentum, let's use the place, and he decided to accept the offer from North Macedonia and invited Prime Minister Kurti and President Vučić to Ohrid.
You mentioned it, Prime Minister Kurti and President Vučić, they agreed, on a let's say, agreement, which is supposed to, to lead to the final one. Still, the High Representative is facing some criticism for not having the both of them signing this agreement. How do you respond to this kind of criticisms?
The last meeting at the end of February in Brussels was never about signature. I mean, it was about discussing the EU proposal on the path of normalization of the relations. And this was very clear to us, it was very clear to the participants that this was the first time since we presented the proposal to both parties that we are meeting trilaterally in the framework of the dialogue to discuss it. So it was never about the signature, so I don't know where the notion about the signature comes from. The High Representative never said, I am convening the meeting in order to sign this proposal. I mean, the dialogue is a sequence of meetings. This was not the last and not the first high-level dialogue meeting. I mean, it's a sequence of events that lead eventually to the final signature of the legally binding comprehensive agreement on normalization of the relations. But this is at the end of the process. So this was for us, this was the part of the process. It was important to discuss the EU proposal, and it's great that we got the endorsement from both sides that no more discussions are needed on the EU proposal, which became an agreement. And now we are going to the next stage, which is discussing the exact steps to implement this. This implementation roadmap, or the annex on the implementation, is going to be discussed in Ohrid, and we hope that the positive momentum and the progressive and the constructive approach in order to achieve progress will be also maintained, that we will be able to go further on this still very long path of the dialogue.
The fact that the EU published for the first time the agreement, does it mean that we are entering really into a new dynamic of the dialogue?
We want to see and we want to hope that there is a new momentum, new dynamics, which was brought also objectively in the region by the illegal Russia aggression against Ukraine. I mean, this changed the geopolitical context everywhere. So of course there is a momentum, but also in the context of Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, we have seen over last months that we are heading from one crisis to another, that we are actually just crisis in a constant crisis management, solving one problem after another, and this is not sustainable over a long term, and this is not what the dialogue should be about. The dialogue should be about solving open issues and gradually closing them one after another and heading towards the comprehensive agreement on normalization, on the overall normalization. So there is a momentum, there is a number of factors, including the strong push from the member states of the EU and strong push from international partners as well, both for Serbia and Kosovo to move forward, because now we really cannot afford losing time, and we need more reconciliation, more stabilization and more normalization in a world which is becoming more and more unstable.
You mentioned that what you're expecting from Ohrid agreement meeting, is for the both parties to agree on the roadmap. How confident are you that they are going to agree?
Well, let's be precise. The task or the topic of the next meeting in Ohrit is to discuss the implementation annex of the agreement. So we are not setting, certain standards or certain deadlines saying this must be done and there needs to be signature, there needs to be agreement. It's going to be discussed because we know this is the tough part. Actually, I mean, it was relatively easy to agree on broad political principles, but now it's about the roadmap. It's about the timelines, the sequencing of steps, what needs to be done and when and how. And this is very important because it will be very detailed. So for us it's important to start these discussions. Whether they will be finished, we don't know, because as with everything in the dialogue, it always depends on the ability of both sides, the Serbian and the Kosovo side, to agree on the way forward. So we cannot predict what will happen. We are there, we expect the continuation of the very constructive behavior, very European behavior, and the fact that we will be discussing the implementation annex is already a sign that we are going to the next stage. The special representative of the EU was in Pristina at the end of last week. He is now in Belgrade at the start of this week. He is discussing exactly the way how to take this forward, taking also feedback from both sides on how this implementation annex should be then put on the table and discussed. So we are going to discuss, and the result, of course, is as always in the hands of both Prime Minister Kurti and President Vučić.